Om Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyav Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragnish Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapash Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shantir Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shantir Shantireva Shanti Shantir Me Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu, sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the Divine Presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Asato ma satkamaya, tapaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityorma amritam gamaya, aviravirmayeti, rudrayatte takshinam mukham, tena mam pahi nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. Peace, peace, peace. Begin today on verse number 41. That will be on page 28 of your books. Tatha vadantam sharanagatam swam samsara dava nalatapataptam niriksha karunya rasardra drishtya dadyat abhitim Sahasa Mahatma. Looking with eyes filled with compassion at the disciple who is seeking refuge and has spoken thus, the teacher at once instills fearlessness in the disciple who is scorched by the forest fire of the world. In our last class, we saw how the disciple approached the teacher and what he said. And as I said last time, that the verses that we studied last week were not necessarily the exact words that the student spoke, but what his heart was speaking. You can see the intensity of feeling, how, as he says, he was scorched. It's again mentioned in this verse as well. Scorched by the forest fire of the world. Such times come in the lives of every spiritual seeker, sooner or later. That's the first major awakening we have to spiritual life. We may be reading spiritual books for a long time or listening to lectures and so on. That by itself does not necessarily constitute an awakening. Well, some kind of an awakening, that instead of reading many other kind of books, one chooses to read about spirituality or hear about spirituality. So there is some kind of an awakening, yes. But there is still a deeper awakening awaiting every spiritual seeker. And that is when something similar, maybe to lesser or greater degree, that happened to this student described in this book happens to us. When somehow things that at one time made a lot of sense, or something that was very meaningful at one point in our lives, suddenly appears to not be so meaningful. And the kind of things that did not interest us or were not so important to us at one stage suddenly become more important, more meaningful. When we begin to look at the world around, people around in a different light, when we begin to ask the kind of questions we may not have asked before. Now, in some cases, it can take an extreme form. We read in Swami Vivekananda's life. As a young man, he was studying for his law exam. And while he was studying, He had already been going to Ramakrishna for 3 or 4 years, I think, by that point. So while he was studying at his desk, we read in a book the sudden spirit of renunciation took over him to such an extent, he just left his books, left his thing, and just started running. Ramakrishna was then in a suburb of Calcutta named Kashipur. He had already developed symptoms of throat cancer. He was being treated and taken care of by his students and others in this, what in Calcutta they call garden house, kind of a good house with a lot of garden and a front yard and backyard, and it's a nice place because they felt that the medical treatment would be easier if he's brought in the city rather than in the suburbs that he was living before. So Vivekananda then, as a young man, his name was Narendranath, he said such spirit of renunciation came upon him that he started running like crazy, just in the middle of, there's a street and he was just running there. He said he didn't even remember to wear his shoes, nothing. And it's considerable distance from where he lived to where Ramakrishna was at that point. Now, this gives us one example, at least, of what can happen when this sudden spirit of intense detachment from everything that is what we might say worldly, and an intense longing for something higher, something transcendent comes upon us. Now, as I said, in some cases it may be very extreme, and in some cases it might be moderate, and to whatever extent it comes, that constitutes the first real awakening. And that is when, as the phrase used in this verse, it says, a disciple who is scorched by the forest fire of the world. It takes a while to look at the world around and just see forest fire. I mean, it appears like a very poetic phrase, because our perception of the world now is, yes, there are terrible things in the world. Everyone kind of understands that. But we also recognize there are some truly wonderful things in the world as well. So to see the world as a mixture of something that is good and bad seems a more realistic perception of what we have right now. But we wouldn't go to the extent of saying it's just a forest fire, in which what really it means is, if we are anywhere in the forest or near the forest, which is ablaze, you just have to get out. Now, we are living on the East Coast, but those people who live on the West Coast, and especially we know in the last few months, and the last few years, in fact, how many fires have blazed there, and how many houses were destroyed, how many people had to be evacuated. And now to think of this entire human experience as a big forest fire, what it means is one realizes that no matter how pleasant and meaningful some of the things might be, in the larger picture, it still cannot give me a lasting freedom, a lasting fulfillment. Because no matter how wonderful things are and can be and will be, they are all going to come to an end at some point. Because ultimately, life as we understand it will be followed by death. Health as we understand it will be followed by illness. Health may be restored, but we are never totally free from it. And so just recognizing the evanescent nature of world, the perishable nature of everything, living and non-living, one then begins to ask, is there anything better, anything beyond this, or this is all that exists? And so that frame of mind, when it overpowers us, then we see it as just a forest fire. And to such a student, the teacher says, he's looking with eyes filled with compassion at the disciple who is taking refuge and has spoken thus. The teacher at once instills fearlessness in the disciple. Now, this fearlessness that the teacher instills is an act of grace. Because the ultimate fearlessness, the Upanishad says that when all duality vanishes, when there is no diversity, there is no duality, just oneness remains, then we become totally fearless. Dvitiyatvai bhayam bhavati. That's the Vedic statement. As long as there is duality, even the slightest bit of duality, the potentiality of fear and anxiety will always remain. The only way this can go away permanently is when we just experience the oneness of existence itself. And so ultimately that would be the state of fearlessness. But what the teacher does right now is instills fearlessness in the student. Later on, the student will have to struggle and make that experience of fearlessness their own. But right now, this is purely an act of grace. So what this does is help calm down the agitation in the heart of the student. Because if you just read the earlier verses, you see how agitated the student is. What will happen? This is the world and it's perishable. How can I get out of it? And so on. And the teacher says, calm down. Because only when we calm down, only when we are assured that we have reached a safe place, only then we can ask questions and expect to get answers. So the teacher now, who sees this student, a great awakening, spiritual awakening has occurred. There is this restlessness to get away from this perishable world. But now he assures the student that you have come to the right place. That now you can feel safe enough to ask whatever you want to ask and have that assurance that your questions will be answered, your doubts will be solved. And that is why the significance of this phrase, instilling fearlessness. Next verse. Vidvan tasmai upasatti miyushe mumukshave sadhu yathokta karine prashanta chittaya shamanvitaya tatvopadesham kripayaiva kuryat. The wise teacher graciously teaches the highest truth to the disciple, who is good, obedient, peaceful, and self-restrained, and who has approached the teacher in a prescribed manner with a longing for freedom. In this, by describing the characteristic of the disciple, we are also being told what are the kind of qualities an ideal student must have. Now, some of these qualities were described earlier in verses 16 and 17, and there are a few more here. There is some overlapping in what was said earlier and what is being said now as well. Now, this verse, as the note points out, is very similar to a verse that appears in the Mundaka Upanishad as well. See, it's upasatti miyashu, which is a student who has approached the teacher in a prescribed manner. Now, in the Vedic period, it was said that one of the prescribed ways a student would approach a teacher would be with a few pieces of wood. The idea was that in the Vedic system of education, there were no schools to go to, but the student would go to the teacher's house and would stay with the teacher's family for several years, almost like a part of the family, and was expected to serve just like at home. Whatever work is required in the family, we do it because it's our home. So that becomes the home of the student during this period of study. And so the carrying these pieces of wood, because clearly the environmental concerns that we have today hadn't yet started. We are speaking about several thousand years ago. And the only fuel they could get in those days was just wood. And so carrying wood for cooking, but also for other ritualistic worship. So one of the prescribed manners, or one of the traditional ways in those days, was go with a piece of wood. Don't try it in the 21st century. If you're going with a stick or something, people will not know why you're going. And today we don't use wood, at least in big cities like this, for cooking purposes. So here prescribed manner so this is the historical context for that. Now what it really means is, when we approach a teacher, we go there as a student. And so the qualities essential for a student, to the extent I have those qualities within me, I become an approach that the teacher in that spirit of a student, that itself would be an appropriate way to approach. So it's not so much what we do externally that is of greater significance, but the internal preparation when we go for study. And so a student who is good, obedient, peaceful, and self-restrained. So these qualities are easy to understand. About obedience, as I've sometimes remarked, years ago when I was in India, and in one of the editorials I wrote for the journal that I was editing, I think I had mentioned something about obedience in it, and written about obedience in a very positive way. And I received a letter. This was before emails came into being. So this is just a regular mail from someone in America wrote to me, horrified that I had said some wonderful things about the practice of obedience. And the one who wrote that letter said that the word obedience sends a collective chill up the American spine. And yes, I understand that in the name of obedience, people have done terrible things in the past. And so we might say, is obedience a mixed blessing, or it's always good? I think when we speak about obedience, we cannot escape the question, obedience to whom? Because obeying a source which is itself good, trustworthy, I think it's good for us. But obeying an authority which encourages something which is immoral or violent, and say, well, what can I do? My boss told me to cheat, or my boss told me to go and do this. I'm just carrying out my orders. In fact, such things have happened even in recent history. After the Second World War, for instance, one of the things with these prisoners of war, one of their defense in the trials that took place was, I was just following orders. So obedience understood in that sense can be problematic. So therefore, when it is said the student is obedient, what is meant is we are obedient to an authority which is trustworthy, which is good, noble, and which never stops us from questioning. Because Swami Vivekananda used to say that there is no mystery in religion. He said that religion should be completely transparent, which means that if there is something we don't understand, if there's something that doesn't make sense to us, we should feel free to question it and not have to follow or not have to think or even carry out into action anything that doesn't resonate with us. So we always have this freedom to do only what makes sense to us. Having said that, we need to also consider whether there are any figures in our life whom we trust. And so a lot of these obedience issues are just connected with the idea of trust as well. So that's the significance of the word obedient here. Peaceful and self-restrained and so on. Next verse. Ma bhaishta vidvans tavanastyapayaha samsara sindhos tarane astyupayaha yenaiva yata yatayosya param tameva margam tava nirdishami. Fear not, O wise one, no harm will come to you. There is a way to go beyond the ocean of samsara. I shall show you the path following which spiritual seekers have crossed the ocean. There is a way to go beyond the ocean of samsara. And that's the assurance that the student needs. That spiritual life is not simply a matter of belief. It's not simply, just have faith in it and it's going to be fine. No, there is a path and you have to walk on that path. Sure, there will going to be challenges, there are going to be struggles, but there is a way. Because if there is no way beyond at all, then no matter how much hard you're going to struggle, there is no hope. But now we know there is a path, there is a way. And so that's the assurance that the teacher gives. The ocean of samsara, as we saw last time, means everything that is, in Sanskrit they say, samyak sarati iti samsaraha. That which is constantly moving, constantly changing. And as we saw, and especially as we grow older, we recognize things always change. Nothing remains constant. And those who are not able to take that change, that moving into their stride, those people have to suffer a lot. But if we accept, yes, this is the nature of life. People will come, people will go. Things will come, things will go. Those who accept that are able to deal with the challenges in a more mature manner. So there is a way beyond the ocean. Now, the analogy of ocean is often used in Vedanta because if it's a small stream or a small river, we might be able to just build a bridge across it and go. But an ocean, now that's huge. Well, today with jet travel, even oceans don't matter much. But these books were written before the jet travel came. So ocean was seen as something which is boundless. You can't see the other side. And so this ocean of samsara, this existence, human experience or whatever is around us, just seems so boundless. And we might just feel there is no way to get out of it. Some people think that death is a way of getting out of it. But that's not true, because samsara is not just this little planet that we see, or even this galaxy that we see. So even after we die, we are still in samsara. In fact, the Upanishads will go to the extent of saying, if we are thinking in terms of places such as heaven or hell, that after death people go to some higher worlds, even those places are in samsara. So if we imagine a heaven or a hell as a place, that is also within samsara. So it really is more boundless than even an ocean that we can think of. And that's why this statement, there is a way to go beyond the ocean, is very significant. And not only is there a way, the teacher says, I shall show you that path, following which spiritual seekers have crossed the ocean. And this is good, because it shows that there are people before us who have gone by this way and have succeeded. And that can be a great help. It's like if you are given a new vehicle, a car, a new model with a new engine, everything is new, and said, test drive it. No one has done it before you. Well, if you are a daredevil, maybe you could. But there's always the fear. I don't know. This machine has not been tested yet. And so these test drivers, they are really paid huge sums because they are taking huge risks. But when we fly in an aeroplane, we feel, there are plane crashes also occur, and we all take some amount of risk every time we go out of the house anyway. But there is a sense of assurance that, well, flights take off and land every day, hundreds and thousands of them. And so the probability that the flight that I take or the car that I drive, I'm going to reach my destination. So because of that assurance, we feel like doing it. And so here we have the assurance that the path that we are about to tread, the path that the teacher is about to show, has works, that there are people before who have gone on this path and have succeeded. That strengthens our faith in the journey. You might remember in Sri Ramakrishna's conversations, sometimes, because he used to have such high spiritual experiences that sometimes when he would describe the different visions that he had, and I'm sure he often saw very blank faces in front of him when he was describing all that, because very few of the visitors that came to him had any inkling or any experience of such vision themselves. So sometimes when Ramakrishna would describe these high spiritual experiences, and then he would pause, and then he would wonder, it's like, is it making any sense to these people what I'm saying? And then he would say, but I say all this to strengthen your faith. Because when we hear mystics and saints and teachers like Ramakrishna and others describing, this is what I saw, it generates faith in our heart that there is a higher, deeper reality which can be perceived. Now, if these great ones had said, I have seen this, now you people just believe it. Just worship me and that's enough. But they never said that. What they said was, I have seen it. You can see it also. That every one of us has that ability, that capacity to experience these things. And that is the assurance the teacher is giving here, by saying that other spiritual seekers have crossed the ocean, and I will show you the path to do it. Look at this other phrase in that verse, no harm will come to you. There is a beautiful one statement in the scriptures which says, Nahi kalyana krit kaschit durgatim tata gacchati. Swami Vivekananda was very fond of quoting this in his letters and in his writings. What it simply means is, the doer of good never comes to grief. That's the assurance given in the books. Sure, we have read books such as Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People and so on. Yes, sometime in short term, it might seem as if holding on to the path of what is right and what is good may not be immediately profitable. Sometimes it might see that people who cheat and lie their way may seem to go ahead in life. That those who are uncompromisingly honest and truthful may seem to suffer in short term. Not always, but sometimes yes. And sometimes then people might wonder, what's the point in being good and honest if others are going ahead of me? But hold on. If you hold on to that path, you will see that you will have the last laugh. That is again, an assurance we find in the Vedas. Satyameva jayate. Truth alone triumphs. The ultimate victory comes to one who holds on to what is right, what is good, what is truthful. So if we are not discouraged by sometimes short-term losses as a result of our goodness and honesty, ultimately that will be victorious. And that's what the teacher is saying by assuring the student, no harm will come to you. Next verse, 44. Astyupayo mahan kaschit samsara bhayanashanaha tena tirtva bhavam bodhim paramanandam apsyasi. There is a great method which will destroy your fear of samsara. With its help, you will cross the ocean that this world is and attain supreme bliss. The great method, the mahan, great method, the adjective great is significant here because it includes that this method, this path is going to require great effort. So it's not just an easy walk. But it's also great in the sense of how effective and time-tested it is. So this word mahan or great, mahan is the Sanskrit here, means that yes, there's going to be great struggle there, but it's also highly effective. The fear of samsara, the fear would include the fear of rebirth and consequent pain and suffering. And very briefly, superficially, our experience of life could be summed up as that which is a mixture of joy and sorrow. In Sanskrit, it's called Sukha and Dukkha. But if we look deeply into our experience, we will see that we are not able to enjoy our happiness much in life. My favorite story about this is what I heard from one of our elderly monks many years ago. So he said that he was in central India. We have a center in a place called Raipur. And he had gone to visit in a nearby city another person whom he knew was a businessman. And so Swami had gone to meet him. And he had known that person for a long time. So when he went to visit him, he found that this businessman friend was very sad and downcast and morose, which was surprising because that year his business had done really well. It made enormous profit. So the Swami was surprised and said, "What happened? Why are you so sad?" And the Swami said, "I heard that your business is doing great. So what's the problem?" And the person said, "Yeah, well, this year it did well, but you have no idea how much losses we had last year." And Swami said, but you made so much profit this year that you have more than recovered what you lost last year. And then this businessman friend shook his head and said, "Oh yeah, that's true. Who knows what will be there next year? What awaits me?" So even this, something that could be celebrated, the joy of business doing well, we cannot enjoy that happiness because of the memory of past losses and fear of future losses. Now, this is a very kind of a drastic example, but to some degree, we might see that could be the story of our own lives as well. That when things don't go well, we are sad, and it seems to be a natural human response. But when things go well, are we truly able to just be immersed in that joy? But it won't be possible because we cannot completely erase the memory of past loss, or we cannot be completely free from anxiety about the future. When we put all these things together, then we see that the world is not as much fun as we thought. And that's why this word about fear of samsara. This fear is not come out of cowardice. I mean, there is one kind of a fear is, I'm not able to deal with it. I have lost, I have no strength, I have no courage. That's a different kind of a fear. But this is a fear of someone who is strong. Strong, and yet who sees that there is no way. There is nothing I can do because of these forces which are far beyond me. I am just a vulnerable, weak creature. The strength that I have is nothing compared to the enormous powers in this external world. What can one individual do? That's not cowardice, that's just recognition of what we are up against. And so that fear of samsara is a fear of pain and suffering. So even those people who believe in rebirth, we might think, well, this life is messed up, but I'll be born again and maybe things could be better next time. Is there any guarantee that things would be better? They could as well be worse than what they are now. So even the fear of rebirth. I mean, just there was someone who was saying is that I hated my school experience so much that I want to get liberated just because I don't want to go to school again next birth. Not again those home assignments and all, it's just too much. So, well, whatever works, as long as some kind of a spirit of detachment can come. But yes, it's good to, and that's what looking deeply means. Looking deeply at our present experience and asking ourselves, do I want to go through all of this thing again? And hence the fear of samsara. That's the significance of the word fear. Verse 45. Vedantartha vicharena jayate jnanamuttamam tenatyantika samsara dukkhanasho bhavatyanu. Supreme knowledge is attained through reflection on the words of Vedanta, which totally destroys the suffering caused by samsara. Reflection, the word in Sanskrit here means artha vichara, which includes the step 2 and 3 in basic Vedanta practice, manana and nididhyasana. It's not enough to just read ancient texts. Now, I mean, this is a fairly ancient text that we are studying. It's at least 1400 years old or 1300 years old. It's not enough to just read it. We need to reflect on it. And that's what we are trying to do here every week, that we take up these phrases and words and spend some time comparing what we read with our own personal experience in life, and also about the things we may have read or heard about in other places. So that is what reflection on the words of Vedanta mean. Because the more we question, the more we analyze, the underlying meaning of these statements will become clear to us. If we just read it and move on, then just the superficial layer of that meaning will be revealed to us. So it's good to dwell on it, even though many of these things might seem, well, it doesn't need too much explanation. What's the point? Because why don't we just go through the meaty part of the book? It'll come. But this is not any less meaty, because every time you reflect on some word, some phrase, some of the ideas related to that word or phrase, we might revisit those ideas, even if we know them before, and it helps us clarify what is being said here, which totally destroys the suffering caused by samsara. The word totally is also very important. Because, yes, there is suffering in life, but we also have some quick fixes in our daily life to overcome that suffering. You have a headache, maybe a strong cup of coffee might take care of it, or just pop a Tylenol or something. So it's not as if these different kinds of suffering that we have in life don't have a solution. There is. But a headache can come again. So none of these solutions are permanent. And so that's why, which totally destroys the suffering caused by samsara. The word totally is also very important. That by that is meant, once it is destroyed, it's never going to come back again. That's what we want. A permanent solution. Verse 46. Shraddha bhakti dhyana yogat mumukshoho mukter hetun vakti sakshat shruter gihi yovaeteshveva tishthatyamushya moksho avidya kalpitat deha bandhat. The Vedas declare deep faith, devotion, and meditation to be the means to spiritual freedom. One who practices these becomes free from the bondage of the body, which is caused by ignorance. By the bondage of the body is often meant the 6 modifications that occur in every living entity. In Sanskrit, that's called Shadvikara. Shad is 6. Vikaras are modifications or changes. And what are those 6 changes? Birth, growth, transformation, decay, disease, and death. All of these things will happen. Some of these things are already happening in our own lives. So every living entity is subject to these transformations. And this itself is a bondage. No matter what we do, as long as we have a body, the body will go through these modifications. Look at the last phrase. The bondage of the body which is caused by ignorance. How come the bondage of the body is caused by ignorance? Think about when we go to sleep. That is when we dream. And if the dream is a nightmare, if it is a terrifying dream, then of course it's not a pleasant experience at all. But why do dreams occur? Dreams occur because I sleep. And what is sleep? Sleep is a state of forgetfulness. Sleep is something that we don't know when it happens. We don't know the exact moment we fall asleep. We know that after dinner, we say, okay, now I want to go to sleep. That time we are fully conscious, we are fully aware. We go to our room, you lie down in your bed, you switch off the light, you turn and twist in your bed, all that we are aware. But at some point, a kind of a veil comes over us. So none of us consciously enters into sleep. Sleep is the point when we kind of become unconscious of the external world. And not just the external world, we become unconscious of our own identity. At that time, once we are asleep, we no longer know where we are, we no longer know who we are. And then the nightmare starts in the dream. So, the dream body, by dream body is meant when we, next morning when I wake up and say, oh, last night I dreamt and this thing happened to me and that thing happened to me. So who is that me in my dream to whom these terrible things happened? That dream body came about because I forgot myself. I was lying in my bed, I forgot who I am, I forgot where I am, and hence a dream me appeared and suffered a lot. That wouldn't have happened if I hadn't fallen asleep. So exactly in the same way, just as the dream me comes into being when I forget myself, this body comes into being when the Atman forgets itself. So imagine the Atman falling asleep. The eternal, immortal, pure, free Atman falling asleep. When did this happen? How did this happen? The Atman wouldn't know. We don't know the exact moment when we fall asleep. And this Atman who has fallen asleep now has begun dreaming. And in that dream, the Atman sees, I am a human being. I am mortal. I am weak. I am suffering. Now, when will this dream go? This dream will only go when the Atman wakes up again. Atman becomes the Buddha again. The word Buddha means one who is awake, one who is awakened. And that's why the bondage of the body, which is caused by ignorance of the Atman that I am the Atman. When the Atman forgets I am the Atman, when the Atman forgets I am a divine being, the Atman begins to see oneself as a human being. So every one of us is a divine being who has fallen asleep and will continue to have the dream of being human beings or being dogs or cats. They are as much living beings as we are. But Only when we wake up, all these dreams will vanish. That's the significance of bondage of the body, which is caused by ignorance. Verse 47. Ajnana yogat paramatmanastava hyanatma bandhas tata eva samsritihi tayor viveko ditabodhavannihi ajnana karyam pradaheta moolam. You, the Supreme Self, are in bondage to non-self because of your ignorance, which has resulted in transmigration, that is samsara, birth and rebirth, birth and death. The fire of knowledge produced by discernment between the two, the self and the non-self, destroys the result of ignorance along with its cause. The fire of knowledge. You can also remember the similar analogy given in the Gita, where it is said that the fire of knowledge burns or reduces all the karmas to ashes. It's the karma that provides the fuel, so to speak, for birth after birth after birth. But it's this light of knowledge, the fire of knowledge, that reduces it to ashes. So hence the significance of the phrase fire. The other important phrase here is results of ignorance along with its cause. It's not enough for the world to vanish, because if the cause of the world is still there, the world will spring up again. And in fact, that is exactly what happens. This world as we see it now will vanish when we go to sleep. Then we say, well, how does it appear again next morning? It appears next morning because the cause of this perception is still very strong. And therefore, this must be destroyed along with its cause. Sri Ramakrishna says that if you want to cut a tree, you must cut it from its root. Just remove the roots. Because if you keep the roots and just cut the trunk, it'll sprout again. It happens all the time. And so what we want are not temporary fixes. What we want is a permanent fix. And that is the significance of destroying the result totally, along with its roots. So we'll stop here. And now, after this assurance that the teacher has given, the student speaks again. And the student will then ask the questions that are in the mind. And in the rest of the book, the teacher will answer those questions very systematically, very methodically. So what we saw last week was what the disciples said to the teacher. And what we saw today was the teacher's first response to what the student had said. So if you have any questions, comments, feel free to ask.
So in the first sloka today, you talked about fear. So as long as there is a slight appearance of duality, there will be fear. How can a jnani who clearly experienced non-duality, such in a state of, for example, samadhi or sahaja samadhi, can ever be in a state of duality again? And hence the fear will rise again.
Well, please, thank you. So once we experience the state of oneness, then there'll be no fear again. But as long as we haven't experienced it, the fear. Now, the word fear should be understood not very literally, in the sense that it's not like we are walking every moment of our life out of fear. So fear could be very subtle, and oftentimes it need not be even fear of our fear of a threat to the body. So we may not feel physically threatened at all. But the fear could be subtle. It could be our ego could be threatened. Just the presence of one other person in a room could be very subtly threatening, in the sense I will not feel as free and spontaneous when I am by myself. But if I know there is someone else, there is even one more pair of eyes looking at me, there's some amount of a barrier comes in. I will feel that I'm being judged, I'm being watched. I cannot feel as free as I am. So that fear is in that sense. So unless and until all of these duality has completely vanished for me, the possibility of that fear will always remain. And so the practice in Vedanta is to see the duality as only an appearance, as not real. Because as long as the world outside of me is real, everything that is happening in it will be really happening to me. It's like when we go to watch a movie. Now, usually, if the movie is not that well made, and you're just kind of enjoying it all the time, all the way, well, you have some popcorn in your hand, you're munching at the popcorn and enjoying the movie. Maybe that movie is about terrible thing. Maybe some terrible things are happening. The planet is getting destroyed, and you have some movies like that. And we're able to enjoy it because we know, oh, that's not real. It's just a movie. But sometimes some movies are so well made, especially if it's a 3D movie and it's so well made, and you may even forget that you are just sitting and watching the movie. You just kind of get sucked into the story. When that happens, then you begin identifying with the story, begin identifying with certain characters in the movie, and then you are affected by it. People weep, people cry, people are terrified. Sometimes little children, if there is a horror movie, some little children will like kind of sit like this and not want to see or hold on to their mom or dad. If the mom and dad keep little children watching such horror movies around them. But as long as what is being seen is real, I am going to be affected by it. And so the practice in Vedanta is, even if it appears real, to analyze it, to reason it out, and say, this is an only appearance. There is something beyond this which is real. That's the idea.
Swamiji, can you elaborate a little bit more around obedience? Because to me, obedience without total surrender doesn't necessarily mean that you are doing what needs to be done. So sometimes when you think about it, I mean, that they say that when you go to a guru, you have to be total surrender, not just be obedient. So
Sure.
if you can kind of like sort of context.
Sure. Of course, obedience, I mean, there is a very positive side to obedience, but even when we are practicing obedience to a teacher or any trusted authority, it's not as if we have locked up our intelligence or saying, I'm not going to now think anymore. Because what if someone tells me, oh, go and do something, say, go and kill someone. And then you say, whoa, I thought this was a very trusted source. And then you begin to say, no, I was not very correct in my earlier assessment that this is a source whom I can trust fully. So we always have to be on the alert, but there is an element of faith and surrender does involve. So long as we are not asked to do anything which is immoral or unethical in any way, I think obedience can be a very helpful practice. And that's why Ramakrishna would often ask his student, he says, always test me. He says, question me. He never said, just do this because I'm telling you to do. And that's what Vivekananda meant, which I mentioned earlier, that there is no mystery in religion, that religion should be as open. Let the light shine bright, that truth is not afraid of light. So there is no mystery mongering. That's the idea. Yeah.
Swamiji, you said that karma is the reason why we wake up every day, right?
Karma is?
Karma is the reason why we wake up from sleep every day. It's our karma that wakes us up when we go to sleep. So when you said, is karma, exhausting karma, also the reason why you get enlightened, or is it knowledge that, I'm not sure how knowledge releases us from samsara.
No, it's not clear.
So I guess my question is, if karma is the reason why we wake up from sleep that we go to bed every night, and then how can we awaken from the samsara, or how can we awaken from this perceived reality that we see, which is actually not existent? Is it also something related to karma?
No, I'm sorry, I'm just not getting it. Maybe later on you can ask me. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Yes.
Good evening. Swamiji, in one of the earlier verses, there was discussion of fitness of the disciple. And I wondered if you have some guidance about how we might evaluate our fitness or work to improve it, knowing that some of us may have a more negative bias about how we see ourselves, or maybe a more positive bias. How do we try to see things clearly?
Yeah, thank you. One of the things that we could do is whatever sense we have about who an ideal student is, an ideal disciple is, based on our reading, based on our studies, based on our own experience, we should try to cultivate those qualities to the fullest. And then it is up to the teacher then to determine whether who we are or what we are doing comes up to the level of fitness required for that study. Because the best we can do is be ourselves as good as we possibly can with our own efforts. And then it's the teacher who will decide whether it comes up to whatever expectations the teacher has. I think that would be the way to do it. Yeah.
Maharaj, I'm going to repeat the same thing which Anu was asking, that when we wake up, because of the karma, no one can sleep forever. Karma will wake us. So when the real awakening will come, is that we have to burn all the karma and knowledge will come, because knowledge and ego is still there, but awakening will come and burn all the karma, because that awakening will come burning all the karma, and this which we get up, from our sleep, karma is still there.
Yes, well, that the final awakening, enlightenment, means ignorance is destroyed with its roots, and therefore there is no sprouting of the karma again. But if the ignorance is not fully removed, only a partial ignorance is removed, then karma is still there. And that's why when it is said that karma will wake us up, what is meant is that after we wake up, we are going to experience joy and sorrow in the course of the day. That joy and sorrow we experience in the course of the day is because of karma. So when it is said karma wakes us up, what it really means is, karma said, oh, there is so much joy and sorrow yet to be experienced by you. Stop sleeping peacefully now. wake up. It's in that sense. And in fact, there is joy and sorrow experienced in a dream also. And so sometimes they say that even when we go to sleep and we dream certain dreams, so if we have got a very painful dream, the pain that we experience in the dream is also a result of karma. The joy, sometimes we have some wonderful, fun dreams. We have a lot of fun in the dream. Now that joy that we experience in the dream is also a result of karma. So we can say that the only time karma doesn't operate is when we are in deep sleep. Because in deep sleep, the doer of karma is absent. There is no agency. We are not doing anything. There is no world with which to react. And therefore, karma is present in both waking as well as in dreams. But both the one who doing the karma and the place where karma is done are both absent in deep sleep. So that's the idea. So, one way to think about it is this way. In deep sleep, if the deep sleep were a state of consciousness, that would be a state of enlightenment. So right now, deep sleep is a wonderful experience. Everyone has great rest, feels rested and feel happy after a good sleep, deep sleep. But it's a state of ignorance. It's a state of when we are not conscious. So if we can have that same almost non-duality that we experience in deep sleep, while fully being aware, that would be enlightenment. So we could say that we at least have a kind of a pseudo experience of non-duality every night when we are fast asleep. What we want now is a genuine experience of non-duality. Okay, so we'll stop here today, and next week we'll begin with verse 48, when the disciple begins and asks questions of the teacher. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. So we'll continue with this study next Wednesday. On Sunday for the satsang, our subject will be overcoming loneliness. So non-duality does not mean reaching a state of loneliness. It means it's reaching a state of being alone. Now, being alone and being lonely are two different things. In fact, even alone is not the best way to describe it. We can just say it's a state when there are not two, not many. That's the idea. Anyway, we'll discuss it next Sunday, and on Saturday we'll have meditation as usual. We'll conclude with a prayer now. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto you.